Hello everyone, GoldenNova here, and it's time to cover another theme chosen by popular demand from my patrons. Every month we have a special vote, and this time around we've got a pretty off-the-wall theme that, by all rights, should have been another series of pack-filler anime imports, never to have seen anything past Table 500. However, despite it all, many of its key cards have been a staple in off-themed decks, particularly ones that look to approach Yu-Gi-Oh! From a slightly different perspective, a more direct one, if you will. Premiering in the June 2018 Battles of Legends set Relentless Revenge, a series of cards were revealed that revolved around the field spell Golden Castle of Stromberg. This theme was piloted by Leon von Schroeder in the anime, and if that name sounds familiar, we've actually covered his brother's deck, Valkyries, in the past. The cards deploy a number of outrageous effects, tied together by some equally outrageous drawbacks. But despite all that, top players deployed a strategy familiar to many Soulsborne speedrunners. Take those disadvantages and flip them over to your favor, and I can't wait to show you how they do it. So let's peruse our shelves for some good stories, see how the theme lives happily ever after, and see if we can add an equally thrilling postscript. It's time to go for the gold with the Golden Castle of Stromberg Explained. Today's episode is brought to you by my lovely patrons, as well as the wonderful people over at Dragon Shield. Get the sleeves as strong as dragon scales and save 5% on your order by using coupon code GoldenNova at checkout. So what's the deal with the Golden Castle of Stromberg? To emphasize the previous segment, this is a series of cards that mention the aforementioned field spell, all of which have pretty powerful effects if you have it on board, but the field spell itself can cause you some issues. But before we jump into that, I've gotta do some housekeeping here. See, look online and you'll see that these cards are categorized as the fairy tale archetype, which makes sense, they are all based on fairy tales. It's Leon's special interest. Sadly, that name doesn't feature on any of the cards themselves, and even then, I'd still be okay with calling them that. You know, I'd still call the Poker Knights the Poker Knights. But what complicates things is that there's actually an archetype named Fairy Tales. You know, Snow, Luna, all that stuff. They even have a card called Fairy Tale Tales, so I'm just gonna refer to them as the Golden Castle or Stromberg cards from here on out. That being said, this does leave out 3 cards that were played by Leon, but don't actually name drop the Golden Castle of Stromberg, which means they don't really add anything to the theme proper, but I don't want to leave out the kids' cards, so let's just call this a bit of a history lesson lightning round to make sure they're all brought into the fold. Gold Moon Coin is a normal spell card that adds 2 cards from your hand to your opponent's hand, then you draw 2 cards. Overall, this is a -3 in card advantage. Your opponent goes up 2 cards, and you lose 1 in total. The spell itself and the 2 cards you give to your opponent are only replaced by 2 draws. So using this as a draw spell by itself isn't at all recommended, so you'll only be seeing this as a card to enable some weird gimmicks. You could give your opponent Swords of Revealing Light in the hopes they trigger a weather report for multiple battle phases. You could use it as a way to make sure your opponent has a specific card in hand that you can call off of the Suppression Pluto to always make use of its effects. Or you could simply use it as a way to manipulate the number of cards in both players' hands for anything from Restructure Revolution to the Fabled Unicorn. Seriously, if this card was any more Sub-Replay Friday coded, it'd just be Cup of Ace. Water of Life is a normal spell card that you can only play if you control no monsters. It targets a monster in your grave, you special summon it in attack position. Also, for the rest of the turn after this card resolves, you can't activate monster effects, except the effects of the special summoned monsters on the field. So, if you're desperate to get back your Protect the Castle style monster, this is another option at your disposal. It's not very useful in going wide strategies, but because you need to have an empty board to activate this card, that synergy already kinda self-selects. It also probably means the on-the-field restriction isn't that bad because you want to use it for its on-field effect if you're reviving it. This does, however, keep you from using hand traps that turn, but your spells and regular traps are a-okay. The real twist here is the lock itself. You can still summon as many monsters as you want, it just keeps you from activating any effects, even mandatory ones. For instance, a random example, nothing to do with a future video or anything, but Chimera Tech Overdragon won't wipe your own board once you're under Water of Life, because that's an activated effect. However, everything else about it is a continuous effect which Water of Life can't stop. It is, in fact, another card built to enable some really goofy lines of play. If it was any more Sub-Replay Friday coded, it would be Gold Moon Coin. Gingerbread House is a continuous spell card that, during your opponent's standby phase, lets you have as many monsters your opponent controls as possible gain 600 attack, then destroys as many monsters they control as possible with 2500 or more attack, and if you do, you gain 500 life points for each monster destroyed. And any attack gained from this card remains even if this card leaves the field. This one's just funny, essentially giving your opponent a cap on how powerful their monsters can be. Or at the very least, whichever ones can survive until their next turn without destruction protection. Anything that had 1900 or more attack is gonna get crunched, but can leave some otherwise harmless monsters with a bit more beef than they otherwise would have. I can certainly see how you could do some wild plays with this, like burn damage that relies on your opponent to have a certain strength of monster to use effectively, but it just lacks that certain something, that strange effervescent quality that makes a combo really silly. In fact, if it was any more Sub Replay Friday coded, the joke would be getting old by now. Okay, that covers all of our orbiting cards. Now it's time for the real deal, and to get a full understanding of them, we'll need to cover the card that ties it all together. Golden Castle of Stromberg is a field spell card that, during your main phase, lets you special summon a monster from your deck that specifically lists the card Golden Castle of Stromberg in its text, but you can't normal summon or set the turn you activate this effect, even if this card leaves the field. You can only use that effect once per turn, but anytime your opponent's monster declares an attack, destroy the attacking monster, and if you do, burn your opponent for damage equal to half the attack the destroyed monster had on the field. An effect that, comically, many people will overlook because they just remember this field spell as the funny card that summons a free monster. Which all sounds too good to be true, and it kinda is. Because during each of your standby phases, you have to banish the top 10 cards of your deck face down, which is not optional. And if you have less than 10 cards in your deck at that time, you destroy Stromberg. So by playing this card, you put yourself on a timer. If you're playing the minimum 40 cards, you have a maximum of 3 turns with this before it either takes a hike or takes you down, so you can't exactly take your time and play control. If you're running Stromberg, you're interested in ending the game as soon as physically possible, and we'll see that play philosophy influence a lot of card choices in the future. And honestly, that time limit is extremely flavorful. I imagine that if I spent my time and money constructing an edifice to my obscene wealth, I also wouldn't have very much time on this earth before consequences caught up with me, so good job, designers. Glyph, the Phantom Bird, is a level 4 wind-winged beast monster with 1500 attack and defense, and you can discard this card to add a Golden Castle of Stromberg from your deck to your hand. And if this card is normal or special summoned, you can target a card in your opponent's spell and trap zone and destroy it. So we're looking at effectively our on-theme terraformings that also double as back row removal. Normal summoning it is a bit of a stretch considering Golden Castle's restriction, but we can summon this off of Castle to get a free body and hit an annoying back row. It's a pretty good utility monster that you'll always be happy to see, but I just can't shake the feeling that it's also supposed to be part of another archetype. I don't know, something about it being a phantom, winged beast, it's probably nothing. Iron Hans is a level 4 Earth Warrior monster with 1200 attack and 800 defense, and if this card is summoned, you can special summon an Iron Knight from your deck. Also, if Golden Castle of Stromberg is not in the field zone when this effect resolves, you can't special summon monsters from the extra deck for the rest of the turn. Hans also gains 1000 attack for each Iron Knight you control while Golden Castle of Stromberg is in a field zone. This is pretty nifty. By summoning this with Golden Castle, you effectively get 2 monsters to use for extra deck summons, which will remain unlocked if you summoned it with the field spell, unless it gets tanked by something before it resolves. It's even going to be at 2200 thanks to having that Iron Knight. But that begs the question, what in the world is this card that's tied to Iron Hans so closely? Well, Iron Knight is a level 4 Earth Warrior monster with 1700 attack and 700 defense, and funnily enough, it loses 1000 attack while you control Iron Hans. If this card on the field is destroyed by battle or sent to the grave by a card effect, you can add an Iron Hans from your deck to your hand, or if Golden Castle of Stromberg is in a field zone, you can add any warrior monster from your deck to your hand instead. So essentially, with the different attack changing effects, you can't actually get more damage than their base values would allow, which I think is very funny, but does help give Hans a way to punch above their weight class. The surge effect is interesting and can trigger if sent from field to grave with our own card effects, so maybe there's a bit of a fusion angle we can run with here. The Star Warriors are always looking for good candidates. But honestly, you're probably better served just using these as a rank 4 or link 2 engine, at least until these two can iron out their differences. Prinzessin is a level 4 light fairy monster with 300 attack and 600 defense, and if this card is normal or special summoned, you can special summon a pumpkin carriage from your hand or deck. Then, if Golden Castle of Stromberg is in a field zone, you can equip a glass slippers from your deck to this card. When this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent by a direct attack, you can target one glass slippers equipped to this card and a face-up monster on the field, and equip that glass slipper to that target. So with all those very specifically named cards, this sounds like incomprehensible slop, and honestly, I don't blame you. So let's rope those other ones in here really quickly so we can get a feeling for what's going on here. Pumpkin Carriage is a level 3 Earth Plant monster with 0 attack and 300 defense, and while on the field, copies of Princessin you control can attack directly, helping it to deal direct battle damage. And your opponent can't target copies of Golden Castle of Strombergs you control with card effects, also they can't be destroyed by card effects. But note that this doesn't prevent the self-destruction if you have too small of a deck, because that's treated as a destruction by the rules. You've gotta love maintenance costs. I, too, enjoy it when my field spell is a Kawaki Maru. So it keeps your field spell safe and lets Princessin attack directly. But are we really doing all of this for just 300 damage? No, because that's where Glass Slippers comes in. It's an equipped spell that boosts the attack of the equipped monster by 1,000 if it's a fairy, and if it's not, it loses 1,000 attack and can't do any attacking. If this card is sent to the graveyard because the equipped monster is destroyed, you can target a Princessin you control and equip this card to that target. So here's the intended game plan. You get Stromberg out, and use its effect to summon Princessin, summoning Pumpkin Carriage while equipping Glass Slippers. Poke your opponent for 1,300, then foist those onto an unsuspecting monster, namely one owned by your opponent. That takes it out of combat, and when you destroy that monster, you can put those slippers back on Princessin to do it all over again the next turn. And this gets wonkier the more Princessin you get onto the field, because one can attack directly, move those shoes over to another Princessin, have it attack, move it over to the third one, do it again, then either equip it to an opponent's monster so it can't retaliate, or back onto another Princessin to use for next turn. It's easily one of the least useful but hilarious play sequences we have in the deck, namely because trying to use their direct attacks to outpace your rapidly decaying deck is not a sound prospect. But the idea of a monster being so enamored with Glass Slippers that it has to stop everything until they can be returned is just peak flavor, and is really just the perfect way to articulate this Cinderella story. Hextrude is a level 8 Dark Spellcaster monster with 2,600 attack and 2,100 defense, and if Golden Castle of Stromberg is in a field zone, you can normal summon this card without tributing. Once per turn, while Golden Castle of Stromberg is in a field zone, you can target a card on the field except this one and destroy it. And if you do, this card can make up to 2 attacks on monsters during each battle phase this turn. And when this card destroys a monster by battle, you can target a face-up monster you control and it gains 400 attack. Now, when it comes to dealing damage, this monster is where it's at. Free spot removal that makes it a double attacker that hands out permanent stat buffs when it runs over things in battle. It's hard to get more aggressive than that. And we get all that on a total baddie. Hextrude really is the whole package. It turns out that looks really can kill. Iron Cage is a continuous spell card that, when activated, sends a monster you control to the grave, or if Golden Castle of Stromberg is in a field zone, you can send a monster your opponent controls to the grave instead. And once per turn, during your standby phase, you can target the monster sent to the grave with this card's first effect, destroy this card, and if you do, special summon that monster to your field. So it's removal that eventually steals what you get rid of, should it remain in the grave. Alternatively, it gets your monster off the board, potentially getting another crack at their on-summon effect next turn. It's interesting, but I think I'd much rather stick to the removal angle. It's kinda like a slower snatch steal, but as long as the first part resolves, it will get rid of the opponent's monster, so it's a pretty sweet trade-off if I do say so myself. The issue is that the deck is very good at fielding its on-theme monsters, but there's no infrastructure to grab anything else, so it's unsearchable removal that if you don't draw the enabling half of your deck, it'll be a bit strange, but it's still just a man in a cage. Okay, so that's all the Stromberg cards, but what do we do with them? Well, the archetype doesn't really constitute much of a game plan by itself. Sure, you have a big beat stick, a material engine, and some back row removal, but not much else. Stromberg is very much an engine more than a pure deck, so the question is, what can you plug this into to make that other deck better? And for that, we're gonna need decks that want to win fast, don't mind losing their normal summon, and maybe work with all the banishing we'll be doing. And thankfully, we've got quite a few options that make for some cool decks. The most infamous of which being rank 8 beatdown. The idea is simple. Schroeder is a level 8 monster you can summon for free off of Stromberg, which is a pretty good battle threat all on its own, and you can pair it alongside level 8 danger monsters to gain access to some of the game's most powerful Xyz monsters. Dingirsu is removal, the Galaxy Eye team is always ready to blow up, steal, or negate things, and the pool has only gotten better with the inclusion of the new Garunix Xyz monster blowing up the entire monster board, and gigantic champion Sargus giving you potentially a lot of material and removal. We've also got the new Infection Buzz King to shred an opponent's card out of your opponent's extra deck if you are forced to go first, and who could ever forget the OTK machine of Draglubian plus Numeron Dragon. However, the danger engine may be on its way out thanks to the Horus monsters, giving us a repeatable series of level 8s we can filter out of our deck and summon for free. You might be tempted to play both, but remember that King Sarcophagus sends cards from hand to grave, it doesn't discard them, meaning they don't combo with your dangers. That being said, Bigfoot and Thunderbird represent more direct removal, so you might want to change between the two depending on your format. Gizmek Orochi also gives us a powerful, repeatably summonable monster with incidental removal if it sticks around long enough. So you have a huge pool of utility to draw from, all of which are attached to giant monsters you can use to bowl over your opponent to take the game. And I haven't even mentioned the biggest part of this theme, because with all the banishing you'll be doing between Stromberg and Orochi, you'll be making great use of Gran Maju da Iza. Paying for Stromberg once already gets you to 4k attack. Pay for it twice. This is an 8k level 3 normal summon, meaning you can win the game on the spot out of nowhere if your opponent uses up all of their resources battling your other giant monsters. It's honestly really cool and I can't help but love it, though it does mean you get to play cards like Dimension Shifter and D-Fissure because you love cards being banished, and it does lock out your opponent, so it's kind of a love-hate relationship. Oh, also, it does encourage you to commit to the bit so much that you'll play cards like Pot of Desires to get another banished 10 just to feed Gren. Oh, and to top it all off, the deck runs Super Poly as a great catch-all answer to a lot of different boards, because the extra deck is just full of a bunch of chaff. It's not that important, so you can just run it all the livelong day. We mentioned Gizmek Orochi a bit ago, but the Gizmeks themselves actually have a tiny bit of synergy with face-down cards. One of the things that can extend our playtime with the deck is recycling our banished cards, and thankfully Makami the Ferocious Fanged Fortress can do just that, recycling 6 once it gets destroyed. We otherwise lack any meaningful synergy with Stromberg, though notably Naganaki is one of the few cards that can interact with face-down cards that have specific values, so you could use it as a way to get an Orochi that's been stuck there. One way to have your cake and eat it too was by playing Pseudospace. Banish a copy of Golden Castle from your grave to get the monster deployment effect, and it even takes on the name so those monsters get all the extra benefits. Then, at the end of the turn, it'll stop being Castle, and while that means it won't be able to protect you from attacks like the real McCoy, it also means you won't have to pay that cost. Another way to get around that is with Metaverse. If you're playing a deck that has its own field spell, or already playing a deck that runs multiples, you can keep this live during your opponent's turn, then during their end phase, flip up Metaverse to swap Stromberg out for another card. Some people might call that playing the system. I call it improv architecture. Playing around the lack of normal summons can be grating when it comes to finding decks to work with, but we may have found solidarity in another theme with a similar restriction: adventure! You can get all kinds of additional tools like Griffin Rider's Negate, Illegal Knight's Mass Quick Removal, Dracoback's more focused removal, and Breath of Resurrection can actually turn the tides in an instant with its double revive. It even comes with its own way to skip out on paying the Golden Castle tax. The Adventure token deck actually has its own field spells, and as long as you control the token, Water Enchantress can just slap one of them onto the board. As for a silly tech pick, I might have discovered the perfect archetype to work with it, because sometimes you need more than a few turns to close things out. Boards are tough to break nowadays, and putting yourself on the clock gives you a weakness your opponent can exploit. So how in the world do we deal with it? Well, recycling our banished cards certainly helps, but Necroface is so passé and really doesn't do anything to help advance our game plan. So what can we play that resets our clock while also outing our opponent's board? Well, do I have the option for you? Dreaming Nemlyria! That's right, while the whole goal of that deck is to banish your extra deck face down, when it comes to Nemlyria's on special summon effect, it can shuffle back any face down banished card. Losing 10 off the top means you get 3 more targets to banish, and the more main deck cards you get rid of, the less extra deck ones you have to put back in, which means less of them you have to banish to get the special summon effect again. And if you have so many banished cards that your opponent's field is all taken care of and you have leftovers, no worries, cause Nemlyria can also banish cards from their grave to cut them off from those resources too. Now that's what I call a fairy tale dream. Alright, so that's all the info I have on the Strombergs, but how do they stack up against the Nova scale? Novelty. The concept of playing a good card with a really bad side effect isn't really anything new. We've had stuff like that since almost the beginning of the game with Dark Elf after all, but it did help to establish a design convention that would be used in modern series based around card lore. None of the Stromberg cards are name-stamped, but because the field spell checks for cards that mention it specifically, we know they all belong to the same theme, and this would be used in stories like Albaz and Visas to tie cards together from different archetypes to give them a broader synergy. It didn't introduce the concept, but it did use it on a wider scale to establish a strategy, and also kinda tell a story. And for that, I have to give Stromberg a 4 in novelty. Objectivity. This deck is interesting because it's such a dividing line between decks that have a solid game plan and ones that find themselves faltering. The Grand Maju variant of this deck, alongside its many level 8 behemoths, will take any misstep from the opponent and grab onto it with its big, meaty claws and wrench it open like me getting into a bag of happy cherries. That's not to say the deck doesn't have weaknesses, it does lack longevity, so blunting its initial momentum is an effective strategy against it, but if you aren't prepared and optimized, this deck will tear you apart. It's strong, but nothing that some good deck building can't overcome, and the deck itself is always ready for a new pilot to unlock some new innovations, so Stromberg gets a 5 in objectivity. Versatility. While we found a lot of interesting themes we can splash together with Stromberg, it certainly lacks widespread appeal. Half the card pool is difficult to justify playing, and the other half requires very specific conditions to bring out their best. Now, if this card banished face up, we'd be having a whole different episode here, but because the cards we mill are locked away forever, not too many themes are going to find what they need in these gilded halls, so this deck gets a 2 in versatility. Awesomeness. However, when it works, it really works. The variety of effects are cool, interesting, and don't leave a lot of room for the game's less pleasant aspects. If you want to win with Stromberg, you have to be ready to interact a lot, and you'll be doing so with a wide variety of tools. To say nothing of the inspirations the cards draw from. We didn't even go over the fact that you get to play as an ass-kicking Cinderella or play through the story of Iron John, a story I'd never even heard of until making this video. It's fast, powerful, to the point, and has enough variance to make every game an exciting adventure. It's just about the most Yu-Gi-Oh thing to ever Yu-Gi-Oh! So Golden Castle of Stromberg gets a 5 in awesomeness, which means it gets a total of 16 on the Nova scale. And that's all I have to say about the Golden Castle of Stromberg. I would keep my eye on these, because Leon actually has a lot more cards that haven't made their in-paper debut. And who knows what kinds of nonsense they'll get up to with modern card design, and the ability to be summoned right from the deck with this field spell. And remember how the castle was hacked in the anime so that the opponent had to pay the maintenance cost? Sounds like a pretty cool piece of future card design space to me. Either way, I encourage you to take a look at what the theme has to offer so you can experience what this deck was like to play once upon a time. But now, I want to hear what you all have to say. Do you feel like the Golden Castle still holds its luster, or are its heydays nothing more but a children's fantasy? And which one's your favorite? I gotta go with Glyph, that bird is too cool for school. Let me know your favorites down below, and if you haven't already, please make sure to like the video if you liked it, subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes, and share this video with somebody you know who loves Yu-Gi-Oh! It really does a lot to help me out. Today's episode is brought to you by my patrons, as well as the wonderful people over at Dragon Shield. Get the sleeves as strong as dragon scales and save 5% on your order by using the coupon code GoldenNova at checkout. Today's episode was also brought to you by my lovely patrons, including this month's illustrious Quasar Commanders Frankie and Marluxia as a Girl, Nebula Navigators 3rd Dynasty, Ada Basilisk, Adam Zajdel, Andrew Newman, Kane Senpai, Christopher Fuss, Clockswork, Dark Dragon X830, Emony Chan, Eric, Aaron the World Breaker, Garland Chaos, Green Knight, Great Big Pillock, Hair Bear, Harry the Ominous Benefactor, Howling Zangetsu, Iron Zero, Iskander 711, Carp, Mana Charge, Marion James E. Picata, Mega Combi, Millennia Asta, Muzuki Clark, Nathan Vig, Natiel Lee Alexander, Orozco 09096, Panther J, Rebel King Lucifer, Red Eyes Jackalow, RJ the Jank Monarch, Sammy Haim, Serenity Towns, Sir Knight JCB, Skybuster Leo, that one dumbass, the Wizard Moose, URTV 667 and Xander Wolfensberger, Cosmic Crusaders Alpha Sly, Almento 5010, A Random Pup, Ariel Kersey, Beluga Master, Blitzwolf, Blue Gem, Borger with the Shotgun, Chaz Ghost, Childish Lamar, Dr. Reaper RIP, Drachenwald, Eki Bullock, Einzig, Eva Padilla, Hike Boyagian, Herbal D, Inblink, Jester Designs, Kale the Dragon, Kevon Public, King Scarlet Yu-Gi-Oh!, Smiley Face, Lemon Yu-Gi-Oh!, Lord Whoop-de-Doo, Manga Pages, Matt Simmons, Mix Boofy, Michael Shimabukuro, Misty, Nitromo, Shizuki Nijimura, Sophie, apparently, Stephen Williamson, Taylor Seymour, The Legendary Raven, and Zal Dreka, as well as the wonderful Starlight Explorers you see on screen now. If you'd like to help me in my journey to cover all of Yu-Gi-Oh's archetypes, get my videos early, be a part of these credits and other awesome perks, it would mean the world to me if you would check out the link to my Patreon in the description or pinned comment, or consider joining as a YouTube member. And if you'd like to see another deck that's just in love with its field spell and banishes cards face down, though for someone else, check out this video I made covering Runics. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.